Hey, what is going on? Hope that everyone is doing well. Looks like we got quite a few people who are jumping in. Looks like plenty of people complaining about the heat right now, which I'm in the Midwest and it is hotter than heck here right now. I think this week it's supposed to get up to like 102 degrees where I'm at. Got Brad from OTD military history is going to be jumping in with us here today. Um, Hang on a second. Take a look at a few things. Let's see. Can everyone hear me okay? All right. Hey, here's Brad. All right. Let's go ahead and bring him in. Hey, how's it going?
Good. Yourself?
Yeah, not too bad. Not too bad. So everybody here in the chat is complaining about the heat right now. What's it like up in Canada?
I'm in the Ottawa area, so it's not too bad. Yesterday was a little warm, but seems to cool down a little bit, I
Okay.
guess. Around, well, 20 Celsius. I don't know what that translates to
I have no
Fahrenheit.
clue.
It's pretty comfortable.
Okay.
So
All right. Is it still kind of smoky up there?
Not in my area right
Not in
now.
your area?
We're getting hit pretty bad in the west.
Okay.
British Columbia, Alberta, and outside Yellowknife and the Northwest Territories are getting hit pretty bad.
Okay.
We had it earlier this summer, but hopefully it doesn't come back.
Gotcha. Well, hey, for everyone who is jumping on, which wow, looks like we got quite a few people who are piling in right now.
Yeah.
On your lunch break. This is Brad from the YouTube channel OTD Military History, which OTD stands for on this day, right?
That's correct. Yeah.
Okay. So hey, I know that you have a PhD in history, right?
Yeah, I do.
Okay.
Sometimes I forget.
Yeah,
if that makes any sense.
So you're far more educated than I am.
I don't know if I'd say that, but
no, I would. So maybe tell me a little bit about your background and kind of what got you into history and maybe kind of the start of the YouTube channel.
Yeah, so I mean, I've always been interested in history since I was ever since I can remember, really, to be honest. I kind of had different interests like Roman Empire, things like that, and it just kind of evolved, I guess, because my grandfather was a Second World War veteran, not a combat veteran, but he served in the Canadian Army, and he just loved history himself. So he was always, when we go to visit, because we lived in the same city, so we visit often. He was always reading something, World War II, Gettysburg, I don't know, Napoleon, this, whatever. So it just kind of sparked my interest in that, and then hearing his stories about growing up during the Depression and the early years of the war, and then serving himself, just really kind of got me interested in this depth of world that is history. And then I went and did my undergrad in history, did an MA actually in American Studies. Maybe we can talk about my American interests a little later.
Oh, okay.
Yeah,
I didn't know that.
Yeah, and then I did some other stuff after my master's, decided not for me, and said life's too short. Let's do the PhD because that's always what I wanted to do. And it kind of brings me to today. I just started the channel because I had the Twitter account. That's where the OTD comes from. It's just meant on this day. I just wanted to profile events in Canadian military history every day, and it just kind of grew from there. And it got really big on Twitter, and I just started to grow it because people were asking for more stuff. And then I did a few shows with Paul Wooditch, World War II TV, who's fantastic, by the way. So that kind of gave me the YouTube bug a little bit. And then I did a video for a museum in London, Ontario, where I grew up, actually. I live in Ottawa now, but and I kind of had to edit myself. So it just I was like, this is kind of cool. I like this. So it was really, really cool. And it just kind of grew from there. I'm like, why not share what I do anyway, kind of on Twitter and my daily work, and go from there. So now I just try to tell as many stories as I can on YouTube with my skill set, to be honest. This is kind of how I think about it.
Okay. Well, I mean, you're kind of, what's the word I'm looking for? You're a bit of a unicorn. In that there's not a whole lot of resources out there on Canadian military history. Like really one of the few that I know of that specializes. I know your channel was originally called OTD Canadian Military History, and it's recently transitioned to just OTD Military History, right?
That's correct. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. I mean, it was the same kind of idea with the Twitter account. That's kind of where it all stems from anyway, is there wasn't much out there. I thought this would have existed, or it was just, I don't know, maybe naivete. I don't know.
Hmm.
I thought it would be something out there. But it just didn't exist. So I was like, okay, why not try something different? I know all this stuff anyway. There's lots of events that don't get covered. So why not? So I tried to do that with YouTube because there is stuff out there. It's just it's not the best in my opinion in the terms of I mean quantity, and there's a lot of sensationalism, and just some of the organizations have kind of seemingly given up on it. Like they'll still
Yeah.
do stuff, but it's periodic. It's like 4 times a year.
Hmm.
That's not enough to grow anything. So I'm like, why not try to learn a new skill set with video editing? I mean, I told you before, but I really admire your skills in that area.
Oh, thanks.
It's a tough learning curve, that's for sure, and I'm still learning. But try to learn that new skill to tell these stories because I think it's the best way to do it.
Okay.
Hitting a public audience, I think, is the best way, just because of the changes in the field. I mean, I know you're a history teacher, so you probably know what I'm talking about. But
Yeah.
the way things have gone, and it's just, I think this is the only way forward, to be completely honest. So I'm trying to cover Canadian stories that interest me, um, all kind of from primary documents, primary sources. That's kind of my central thing, because that's what I do, right? I spend a
Yeah.
lot of time in archives, right? So
Yeah.
a lot of it
Well,
online now,
I,
but
I'm I'm
it's what I
seeing
do.
some comments roll in. Some people asking, is there okay now? So I got to be careful here and not sound offensive with it, but asking is there enough Canadian military history to have something like every day? Have you
Yeah,
seen the meme of I think it's in reference to D-Day,
right.
and it's the meme with the mother with a child at the side of the pool, and she's like giving
Yeah,
this one child all
yeah,
kinds of attention, and one child's drowning, and
yeah,
the kid that's getting all the attention, it's like
yeah,
the public with the U.S. on D-Day, and then the
yeah,
little kid drowning, it says the British, and then down at the bottom of the ocean is a skeleton sitting in a chair, and it
yeah,
says the Canadians.
yeah. That describes my daily experience. Uh, that is perfect. I think I've shared that before, or made it myself. It
what
is how it
why
feels. I mean, and I
why
tell
is
this to
that?
people. Well, numbers is a huge thing. I mean, it's simplistic, and it's not the it's just the truth, to be honest. I mean, there's more Brits and Americans than there are Canadians.
Okay.
We get outnumbered by a lot. I mean, you guys to our south are behemoth. I mean, no offense intended in using that
No,
word,
no,
but
no.
it just
Right.
that's how it feels, right? You guys are just gigantic. We're not. And Britain has more people, A, to begin with, and a so-called longer established history and a bigger voice, because of the empire, but which we
Hmm.
were part of.
Yeah.
But we've kind of cleaved off in a way from the empire stuff. We've tried to kind of set up our own identity in that area. We've tried to cover it ourselves, kind of write out that British past a little bit in some areas, in some ways. But I think that's a big part to do with it, and money is a big one. I mean, like Hollywood, right? You guys outnumber us in
Yeah.
films, and same with the Brits, right? We just get no representation. Like Longest Day is the one that always comes to mind, right? There's
That's what I was thinking of.
No Canadians in that at all,
Yeah,
unfortunately.
and Longest Day is supposed to be like one of the most comprehensive
Yeah,
treatments of D-Day,
yeah.
ever laid down on film. And
Yep.
do the Canadians even get mentioned or show up
No.
in it? I
So
didn't. Yeah.
there's the one scene with the Luftwaffe where they're like, "That's the Luftwaffe show for the day." That's over Juno Beach. Um, the
Uh,
footage isn't even of Juno Beach because I know that footage. That's it. There's no mention of Canadians, at all. Um, yeah,
so
we don't get mentioned in anything. So and we don't try to push our own voice as well. So
right.
I think that's a big part of it. I mean, I'm not blaming other people, right? Because we have to tell our own stories, and we
Hmm.
just don't. And that's what I try to do.
So my kind of and I guess my depth of knowledge as far as like Canadians in World War II was very surface level, and when went back to Normandy and started doing this Normandy series, linked up with Paul. And I wanted to do some stuff, all the beaches. So I wanted to go to Juno Beach.
Right.
My first trip, I just kind of like stopped there, looked. I was like, oh, here's Juno Beach. Here, let me grab some sand. Didn't have a whole lot to go on. And you mentioned Paul Woodage from World War II TV earlier.
Yeah.
He was with me, and he was like, "Hey, let me just take you some places and show you some things."
Yeah.
So we started off on one of the beaches, and then went into Abbey Ardennes,
Yeah.
where the massacre took place, and then on into Bretteville. What can you say the whole name of that town?
Not well. Despite my background, I don't. My French isn't terrible.
Okay,
Uh,
I don't want to say it because I don't.
Ogaguz is the best way I can pronounce it. I know that's not right, but it
I,
means yeah, it's like the brave or something like that. So
okay, all right. I
it's
just
one
call
of
it.
the various Bretvilles. Yeah, there's many of them in Normandy. That's the
I
problem.
just call it Bretteville because if I try and say the whole
Yeah.
thing, I'll hurt myself.
Yeah. Same.
It's like this super complicated, and that story of
Yeah.
the Canadians going up against the 12th SS there
Yeah.
in Bretteville. Oh, that is such a legendary story. Um, and for people who are watching who maybe watched those videos, Brad was a huge resource for me going into that, as far as helping me kind of understand that a little bit more. But anyway, after that, I became completely enamored with the story of the Canadians in World War II, and I've just been trying to devour stuff ever since.
Yeah.
Um,
There's lots out there.
what's kind of your favorite story? From, it doesn't have to be Normandy either. As far as stuff in World War II that
Well,
that
there's
you, I know it's like asking you to pick your favorite kid, but
yeah, there's so
what's
many.
what's something that people don't know that they should?
I mean, the Brett story is usually my go-to, but you've kind of
Hmm.
covered that. So it's an amazing story. I mean, yeah, everyone who hasn't seen it should watch it after this. And I've got some stuff on Brettville as well. But one that took another fight that took place not actually too far outside Brettville, just to the little bit to the southwest, at a place it's now part of what's now become the same town as Brettville,
Okay.
called Cardenville. It's called Cardenville Farm. So that's one of the companies of the Regina Rifles is about there basically as the tripwire for the 12th SS attacks,
Okay.
and they hold them off. They stop the main attack on the beaches from developing. I mean, they take a wallop. They're in this literally Norman style, which you've seen, this Norman style square walls, right, with the brick, and that's
Yeah.
how the arms were built. And they dig in and with their anti-tank guns, and they get a little overrun. They have to hold them off with Piats, right, which are the British bazooka, basically, and grenades and all that stuff. And it just goes on all night long, and then into the day. I mean, I always pretend the SSS making stupid tactical decisions, like the attack across an open field in broad daylight,
Yeah.
and the Canadians light them up. And then they finally, after having been cut off literally from communications, they get a link established, and they bring down the artillery and just decimate this attack, and it doesn't develop. Right, they had those lead elements that got into Brettville that you covered extremely well, but that stops the whole attack. That stops any of the push forward, and that's when the line in that area, right, stabilizes into that static warfare that you see for a month. But without that, who knows what would have happened, right?
Yeah.
It's this story that doesn't get a lot of coverage. Also connected to that is a Canadian tank takes out, was it 4 or 5 Panthers in a row, within minutes, within 5 shots. I mean, it's a fantastic story that gets zero attention.
You
Um,
said Panther. I thought all of the German tanks in Normandy were Tigers.
Well, I don't know if they were all Panthers. I don't remember off the top of my head, but it's still it's a Firefly, which is an amazing tank in that
Yeah.
regard, and they just take them out in an ambush style, and it just doesn't get coverage. It's from the unit that's one of my local units. That's why I love it. From where I'm from,
Oh,
is the
cool.
First Azars. So it's a fantastic story that doesn't get talked about much. Mark Milner's great historian, covered it in his book, in Stopping the Panzers. Literally, if no one's read that, they really should. It'll change how you see Normandy, because it definitely did for me.
By the
Yeah,
way, for
so
people who didn't pick up my sarcasm, I was joking about the Tiger
yeah,
comment. Everybody
Yeah.
thinks, even the veterans who fought there,
Yeah.
thought that everything that they were up against was a tiger. A lot of people don't realize, when you're talking about Normandy, everybody focuses on Omaha Beach,
Yeah. A
bloody
lot.
Omaha,
Yeah.
um, which rightfully so. I don't want to take anything away from the the fighting that took place at Omaha Beach, but what they don't realize is that if you look at the invasion force, um, in comparison to the number of soldiers who landed on the beaches, uh, Juno has a higher percentage loss
Yeah.
than Omaha Beach. I mean, those guys uh, really just it was every bit as bad as Omaha. I guess I should say,
Yeah.
um,
I mean, in a
but
lot of
but
ways,
doesn't
yeah.
but doesn't have the casualty count or the body count, I guess. So it
It,
doesn't get the attention that I think it deserves.
Yeah, I mean, it's a difficult piece of terrain, and you can still see that today when you go there. You can see why, because there are these small little towns. I don't towns, villages. I don't really know what to call them. In Canada, they're
Yeah,
villages.
yeah,
They're tiny, tiny, tiny. So, but those were dug in. The Germans were dug in, put in bunkers. Fortified the houses that are literally on the line. Like those are still there, right? The famous Canada House, for those who know that. So
yeah,
difficult. That's why it was so hard, because some of them landed in the wrong spots. They had to come in later because of, I think I showed on social media last week or something, a map showing offshore, uh, that they had to wait for the tide to come up. So that means,
yeah,
right, that Omaha, Utah, some of the British beaches are already landed at. So they're already been warned that they're coming. So
yeah,
everyone's ready and waiting. And as soon as the boat, that scene in Saving Private Ryan where the boat opens, that literally happens on Juno Beach. Like that happens to some of the lead elements of the Queen's Own Rifles, who land at the famous Canada House now, where all the memorials are and
yeah.
the house is covered in Canadian flags and stuff like that. That's what happens there. And that doesn't get talked about at all, really, in a wider thing. So it's just as bad. I mean, you read these accounts of those who survived it somehow, and it's harrowing stuff. It's full of mines, machine gun posts. There's
Well,
water in behind some of the spots. It's a fantastic story that doesn't get much attention wider outside of Canada and really those enthusiasts, unfortunately.
the place where Paul took me first, um, I think it's actually the banner on your YouTube page
Yeah,
with that giant seawall.
yeah,
There at is it Courseulles?
yeah. It's
Is, it,
Souls. Yeah,
is,
yeah.
is that how you say it? It's Courseulles?
That's
Okay,
as how as I've been told to say it.
yeah, my French is awful,
Yeah,
but
mine's not as
when
good as it should be, but
but when I
yeah,
went there and went and got down on the beach and stood there and looked at that seawall, I thought, my gosh, um, if I had to pick where I was landing along the Normandy coastline, this
yeah,
is last.
yeah.
And these guys have to bring ladders and scale that. It's just uh, it's absolutely insane. And anybody who is a Star Trek fan,
Yep.
um, Scotty,
Yep.
lands there on Juno Beach, and I forget what finger he got shot off or something like that.
Middle, I think, in one of
Was it
his
his middle
hands.
finger?
I think so, or in one of the ones in the interior. I mean, it obviously didn't seem to impair him at all with the career he has after the fact. I mean, he's an artillery officer. It's called a
Mm-hmm.
forward observation officer in the British military, the British Commonwealth militaries at the time.
Yeah,
So he's coming ashore to help spot that artillery, and it gets confused. There's claims that he led an infantry company in, which there's no evidence to support that. But he did go in, and he was coming back to the beach for whatever reason. The comms were a huge problem at the beginning of Normandy, and he gets shot by a Canadian sentry, unfortunately.
yeah.
But he gets wounded. But his story doesn't end there. He becomes a pilot, actually.
Oh
So,
wait, I didn't
oh
know
yeah,
this.
the story's not over. No,
Oh,
by no means. He gets trained as a pilot because I think I saw him here watching today. Dave Patterson, who's a gunner himself in the Canadian military, or was retired now, says it's easier. It was easier to train gunners to direct the fall of artillery than it was to teach pilots how to be gunners. So they trained a bunch of, as they're called, foos, the officers, to be pilots to help spot the fall of these rounds. And he was in one of those after he healed up and everything, and he never saw the combat end of it. But he apparently was a bit of a rascal. Is the best way to say it. He would fly way too low, do stunts and things like that, and he was called like the most dangerous pilot in the Canadian Army because it technically was, right. So it's a crazy story. It's just he's it said the story ends there, but it doesn't. And it's fascinating. And people forget he's even Canadian. And he's got this fantastic story that all begins before he becomes so popular with that show.
Wow, I had never heard that.
Yeah.
The as far as I'd ever got was him being wounded by friendly
Yeah.
fire on Juno Beach.
Yeah.
Um, huh. Well, there you go. Learn something new every
Yeah.
day. Um,
Yeah.
so before my plans went sideways this summer, I was supposed to go to Vimy Ridge and also
Yeah.
to Dieppe. I talked to you about that and
Yeah.
uh, had you kind of help me navigate some of the corners around that stuff.
Yeah.
Um, so recently, I mean, we're talking Canadian military history. I've been getting more into the Canadians in World War One and
Right.
their contribution.
Yeah.
Probably pound for pound the best fighters on the Allied side. I would say. I mean, reading their stuff is amazing. I know I just offended every American and Brit who's watching this, but
Australia, New Zealander.
and,
Yeah.
yeah, but man, you read about the Canadians and they were kind of like the oh, what's the word I'm looking for? Um,
Shock troops.
yeah, they're kind of like the shock troops they call it. Hey, when things are getting tough and
Yeah.
when we need somebody to break through and just kick butt, um, call up the Canadian Corps.
Yeah.
Um, now prior to World War One,
Right.
the Canadians were involved in some way with like the Boer War, correct?
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay.
So I can do a quick rundown if that helps a little bit. So
Yeah,
so
sure.
Canada gets Dominion status, which basically is confirming domestic governance
Mhm.
independence. Basically, it's complicated, it's confusing. It happens at all different times, but anyway, it comes together. Several what are called provinces come together to make Canada the Dominion of Canada. It doesn't have control over its foreign policy yet.
Okay.
That doesn't happen
Around
until
around what time would this have been?
1867 is when it first
Okay.
establishes, and then other provinces join after that.
Okay.
So, but also important in Canada, especially at that time, not so much today, but at that time, the Canadian population was mostly French and English. And there was
Mhm.
more of a clear divide in that. And why that's important for the Boer War is because Canada wasn't really necessarily expected to make, a contribution. The Canadian military at the time is tiny. I mean, like tiny, hundreds at this point, really, that can actually do something or can fight. There's not much going on. So there's a lot of pressure from English Canada to do something to help the empire.
Okay.
French side doesn't want to do that because they don't feel a connection to Britain. They don't feel a connection to the empire in that sense, especially for foreign, what they call, colonialism and outright expansion is which kind of South Africa was.
Yeah.
So the English, so they have to reach a compromise. And the prime minister at the time, Wilfrid Laurier, who's French Canadian, says, "We'll send only volunteers. We won't make people go who don't want to go." And that really sets a precedent for Canada. So Canada sends a couple of battalions at a time and some cavalry. And that's kind of where that really starts to get up. And then with the First World War, you see a huge boom. Like there's this massive support for Britain. Canada's automatically at war when Britain declares war in 1914. Canada doesn't make that decision on its own. But there's huge enthusiasm, even in French Canada at the time, massive enthusiasm across the country. And that's when you see the Canadian military, which becomes the Canadian Expeditionary Force, is sent overseas. And that's what the Canadian Corps is part of. It is part of that. So that's the infantry and artillery, and some cavalry comes in and out. But that's Canada's mass contribution to
Okay.
the First World War is the Canadian Corps with its infantry and artillery and engineers and all of that stuff. So that's the big contribution. There's other contributions, with the Royal Flying Corps and the Navy service, and the Royal Canadian Navy is part of it as well. But nothing's as big as the Canadian Corps.
Okay. Yeah, you also have some Americans who are doing a little border hopping during that period of
A
time
little
too,
bit, yeah,
and jumping
a
in with
lot.
the Canadians
A lot.
because
There's a lot of that actually for a long time, and it happens in the second as well, right? The Second World War, World War II. Come across because they want to, help and get involved. And I say this on other podcasts and other things. The border between Canada and the United States is a lot more fluid back then.
yeah,
Wasn't like it was today with all the work permits and border checks, and those don't exist. I mean, my grandparents told me wild stories because my grandfather grew up near Windsor and Detroit, so he would just
oh,
you go
okay.
across for like an hour and no one would stop you. So it was just it was wild. Like you could do whatever you wanted basically. So people had connections and they would go across all the time and have family, and it was not a big deal really until it becomes a big deal when governments get upset. But
Hmm.
other than that, it's massive. So many Americans. I mean, it comes up in almost every story of every unit. There's some American in there who's part of it. So yeah, it's a fascinating part of this.
So, um, right now, I'm about 3/4 of the way through um, Shock Troops
Yeah,
by Tim Cook. So
excellent book.
I started off reading what's his first one?
Uh,
Um,
at the sharp end. Yeah,
at the Sharp End. Yes.
yeah,
Yeah. So for anybody who's watching, there's a Canadian author by the name of Tim Cook who is like would you say he's one of the go-to guys when it comes to military
yeah.
history? Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, he's
Eh,
World War One especially, but World War Two as well. He's written some fantastic on both. He's a great guy too. Full disclosure, I've worked for him, so I know him, and he's a great
Oh,
guy and great
okay.
historian. So yeah,
Yeah.
he's taught in the field for sure.
Yeah. So where I'm at in the book right now is where they're just getting ready to go in the Battle of Amiens
Yeah,
in 1918. So I'm kind of on the narrow end of the funnel with
yeah,
that book. But man, reading through those books has been so stinking fascinating to me. Um, for people who might take an interest in Canadian military history in World War One or World War Two,
right.
what are some books or authors that you would recommend for
Yeah,
people who are just kind of like entry level, wanting
yeah.
to
Well, I
get
would
like a
even say
broad
Tim
picture?
Cook is a good place to start for both. I mean,
Okay,
behind me somewhere, he's got the First World War. He's got yeah, at the sharp end, shock troops, and then Second World War is necessary war, and it's right there, but I'm not wearing my glasses. Fight to the finish. So that's the Second World War, World War II. So
okay,
what he's basically done is he's trying to track the every man, every woman perspective, basically. How to say it really is because the First World War, right? It's mostly Canadian Corps. Second World War, there's RCAF and the Navy, right? So those I think are a good starting point because it's full of personal recollections, letters, and diaries and photos because it's all from the Canadian War Museum where Tim works.
okay,
So he's got the intimate knowledge of that. I mean, he has had lots of help. He's worked on that for a long time. These books are a bit older, but they're still hold up. Those are my go-tos. That's what I recommend for everyone who's even just starting because he explains why things happen the way they do, but then you get the private in the trenches opinion, or in a slip trench somewhere in Italy in 1943, or on a corvette in the middle of the North Atlantic. Like you get all of that, but you get an understanding overall. So those are my go-tos if you're just starting out, don't know really much at all, because it'll help you get that. It's got great maps and photos, and those are it's two, right? It's two volumes each. So I
yeah,
recommend those four books as the go-to if that's what you want to start to read about. Is a good place to go.
okay, cool. And so I mentioned here at the beginning that your channel was originally called OTD Canadian Military History,
Yeah,
and now it's OTD Military History.
that's
And
correct.
and if I am sitting here, I got my laptop right here. If I start looking, it looks like you've started to get out of your lane, and are hitting some American military history too,
Yeah,
which I think is awesome. Um, you did a video a couple of weeks ago
yeah,
that, in my opinion, I mean, I like all your stuff, but in my opinion, this was the best one. Um, it's called "Heart Stopping Chaos: An American Soldier's Firsthand Account of D-Day," and it's on Omaha Beach.
yeah.
Dude, that video was outstanding. Can you tell me a little bit about like
Thanks.
where that started and like maybe the process of developing that video because that was so good.
Yeah, a long time coming actually for that one. So obviously you have an interest in Normandy. I unfortunately had a relative killed there on D-Day, so I've always had that kind of connection there, and wanting to learn those stories, particularly those from those who landed there. I
Mhm.
mean, it's harrowing stuff, right? Like you talked about how Juno was crazy
Yeah.
and bloody and brutal, and Omaha no different. So I was trying to. This is way back when trying to get the channel going, trying to get some interest basically built up, and Normandy's a good way to do that. I was doing some digging in the U.S. National Archive, which the digitalization they've got, you guys got us beat by light years in that regard. So I just can find video of even Canadian stuff on there when I was that was
Oh.
my sole focus, and it just popped up. This letter, not even letter, recollection is the best way to put it. This Major Stanley Bach, who was technically part of the 1st U.S. Infantry Division, but is attached to the 29th for D-Day as a liaison officer
Mhm.
with the HQ of the 29th Division. So, as we know, those two divisions literally got mixed up on the beach due to all kinds of circumstances. So, I just found this thing. He wrote down on the day that night because the diary, he gives times and it just literally stops at like 6 p.m. Because I think
Yeah.
he's literally sitting in a foxhole or a shell crater writing. So he
Mhm.
took an envelope, split it open so he could write on both sides, and then a piece of memo paper he must have had with him or part of the HQ or something. And he talks about because he comes ashore at around 1000 hours, where the beach is still absolute chaos, and he describes what he sees from there until about 6 p.m. Artillery coming in, trying to get up those bluffs, which takes hours, moving in slightly inland. I mean, he doesn't really fully give the details, so I had to dig as much as I could
Yeah.
with the resources I had available, right? Because I'm not in the U.S. I haven't been to a U.S. archive in a very long time, so I couldn't really access that stuff. So I was trying to figure it out based on maps, and there's lots of footage of Omaha, trying to piece that together, and that's just kind of how it came about. I was going to save that video, but I figured, I'm too excited. I get a little excited, as some of my viewers know, about stuff like this. And I just like, I'm going to share this. This is the time to do it. It's a fantastic story, and learning about Bach, and wish I could have found more about him, but I couldn't, unfortunately. But you have to just, uh, not to make people go watch it, but I can't describe it as well as
Yeah.
he can from
Yeah.
what he saw, because I literally read it and I put it up, and you can find it yourself. You can read these letters; it's linked in the video. So not letters, recollections.
Yeah.
It's typed up afterwards, and it's just some of the things. I mean, some of the descriptions are extremely graphic and difficult to hear, but it's a fantastic little piece of history, and that's what I aim to do, and that's why I did it, is because I dug and dug, and I found nobody mentioning this, other than the occasional social media post that would get like 20 likes on
Yeah.
Twitter from the National Archive or something like that. I'd never read about him before. I dug in all the resources I could find on the 29th and the 1st. Doesn't get mentioned. Right, there's websites, right, that detail both, and which is amazing, right? They cover everybody. He's not on either, so I was like, oh, this poor guy, he's got the connection to both and he's not mentioned on anything. So I was like, okay, so I think he deserves to have that story told. And he talks about the people he meets, and those who are around him, and I had to place where he was, and it's a place that I'm looking forward to going and visiting, because I've been there. I was there without
Yeah.
realizing it years ago, where
Right.
this took place. But I definitely want to go back to that literal spots where he is, and
Well,
really see that again.
I mean, a lot of D-Day or Omaha Beach stuff. It looks at it from 30,000 feet,
Exactly.
and this video really zooms in and takes a look at it on a personal level. And I thought you did an excellent job on it. And when I watched it, it got to the end, and I was almost angry that I didn't come up with the idea first because it was so stinking good. I was like, oh man, that was so good. I wish I would have had that one. But
Yeah, I
yeah, I'd
mean,
highly encourage people to go and check it out.
it's just a fantastic story. I mean, it's like you said, it's a lot of it's always 30,000 feet, particularly the early days in Normandy, and
Mhm.
I want that personal. I want that
Yeah,
personal story. I want to see, Omaha's terrible. You hear that over and over and over again, but what does that mean? Right?
yeah,
You know what that means, but what does that actually mean? What does that mean for that guy who's coming off that landing craft, where he's
right.
supposed to be fine, right? It's 10 o'clock in the morning. The beach is supposed to be secure by then. not even close. So
Yeah,
he's not expecting that. So it's just
yeah,
it's such a raw look, and that's what I love about history is the rawness, the things we don't expect and the things
right.
that you think are going to be polished and that are not. I like surprises, I guess, in that way. So fantastic.
Yeah. Now, I don't want to take up too much of your time, but are you? Did I see something where you're planning on going back to Normandy
Yeah,
at some
that's
point?
correct. Yeah, next year.
What have you got in mind? Like, what are you wanting to do there?
So next year, because I just want to go when not now because it's too hard to get there right now, but when the weather's a little better in April next year, in time to have a whole slew. I mean, I don't even know yet. I've got about 30 planned, and it'll probably be more of primarily the Canadians in Normandy.
Good.
Because again, a lot of them just don't exist, right? Like you've covered them, and it's just only so much one person can do, right? So I'm going to try
Yeah.
and do as much as I can. Those little stories, the big ones that you haven't heard about, some places that I've been before that I think deserve more recognition and more attention. But also, yeah, so I'm covering those basically from, before the invasion actually starts with the Royal Canadian Navy and the Air Force. And then moving through all the way to the closing of the Flace Gap at St. Lambert sur Dive, and then with the poles as well at the Mace, right outside there, because they're technically part of First Canadian Army, so I count that.
Okay.
But it's a fantastic story. If you haven't looked at any of that, David Curry winning the Victoria Cross, which is the Canadian Medal of Honor in
Mhm.
British Commonwealth, fantastic story. So I want to cover that from the ground because I'm not the only one, and not claiming to have invented this, but Terry Kopp, we've got his books around here somewhere. Well, this is one of them. He says the ground is a primary source, right? So
Oh, okay.
that's what I want to do, right? I love primary sources. Shocking.
Yeah.
A PhD historian loves looking at old dusty stuff. So that's what I want to do is use that as the ground, as the primary source to understand why things happen the way they do. And I'm hoping to cover, like I said, Omaha from that Bach, do that Bach video, quote unquote, again, but with the ground, right?
Yeah.
Understanding where he was. And as much as I can, I'd love to cover Cobra as well, just because it goes part and parcel, right, with what the Canadians are doing and
Yep.
trying to close the gaps. So that hammer and anvil tactic, I'd love to cover that in depth. So I'm trying to get there. I'm going to get there next year, and have some as much ready to go when the anniversaries start to hit, right? D-Day and like taking of Khan and Saint Lo and
Yeah.
all that stuff. I'm trying to cover as much of that as possible. So that's my big plan for next year.
Yeah. I'm hoping to do the same. I'm wanting to go back and kind of hit some of those more inland areas where the Canadians were. Um, One thing that I was pleasantly surprised with, um, a lot of times on my channel, um, like if you play, if you play the hits, like stuff with
Yeah,
Omaha Beach or anything with 101st Airborne or stuff like that, those videos do really well.
yeah,
And then if you hit something that's a little bit,
yeah,
not as
yeah.
well known, those videos might do okay. Like right now, I've released some videos, from up at Cherbourg,
Yeah,
and going
watch
up the
that this
peninsula.
morning.
Oh, okay, cool.
Yeah,
Yeah,
great stuff.
I mean, those videos in comparison to, like at Omaha Beach or 101st Airborne or Band of Brothers, aren't performing as well. But the Canadian videos that I put out, um, I've never had a more appreciative group of people than the Canadian viewers who were like, "Oh my gosh, an American, notices us and knows that
Yeah,
we were there." And those I was so happy that those videos did well. I always want everything that I produce to do well, but I was really happy
right.
about those because I want people to know these stories.
Yeah.
And yeah, I appreciate your contribution to it as well.
Yeah, I
So
mean it's yeah, just real quick. I mean, it's kind of what I was talking about, right? We don't tell enough of our own, so when someone else does it, we get appreciative, but and no offense to anybody, but we got to do it ourselves too, right? It's something we got to do. So I'm glad to get both perspectives, right? I love multiple perspectives. So when you
yeah,
covered that with Woody and his experience and yours, and it's fantastic to see, and seeing the outpouring for history always makes me happy. So
yeah, absolutely. Well, hey, man, I
yeah,
won't take up any more of your time, but hey, thanks for carving out a little bit of your day to jump on here and talk history. I'm always looking for any excuse to, nerd out with somebody. So yeah,
yeah,
I appreciate you
yeah,
taking the time and everything you're doing on your channel. Yeah, and for
yeah. Thanks
anybody
for
that's watching, go check out OTD military history. And if you're looking for a place to start, the video that I mentioned called Heart Stopping Chaos that talks about Omaha Beach. That's a great one, but there's all kinds of great information on there that you'll learn a lot from.
Yeah, thanks for having me on. I really appreciate the chance to chat. I always love chatting history too. I haven't been on for 40 minutes. Feels like 5 seconds. So it's always
Yeah,
great.
exactly. All right, man. Well, hey, you have a good day.
All right, you too. Thanks a lot, JD.
All right, see you, bud.
Okay, bye.
Bye.